Hi, I'm Guha Shankar from the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress. I'm going to ask our distinguished guests to introduce themselves, and then we're going to go into some questions for them. We'll do that for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to audience questions, so keep them handy. So starting on my right, Dan, please, if you would.
Mo, Danzi mamuli kutsani mat inyavaik mata shimuzi paipa hiwazo hot nayo pipa shitamuzi tiv nyavi hota. My name is Daniel Golding. I'm from the Quechan Nation, and I'm come from the Roadrunner clan. And it's great to see so many different people here gathered and to watch this movie. So thank you.
Are you a filmmaker?
I am a filmmaker. I'm the producer and director of this. All right.
Yeah, a key detail.
Good save.
Sir, if you would.
Dungok, Donald Saktoma Liwizu, Passamaquoddy, Naga Wigi, Madakmikuk, Naga Zibayig.
Thank you. Jen?
Yeah, she Jennifer John's Himmelreich Inisha, as a plan initially, Twitch in Bashichin, Twitch Oshidashiche, Nota Danash. Hello, my name is Jennifer Johns Himmelreich. I am a series producer on this project.
I'm Gary Glassman. I'm the executive producer of the series, and thank you all for being here.
So watching this movie again for the second time, again, ran me through the ringer, a gamut of emotions. And I appreciate everything that all of you have done to bring these important images and words to us. And I'm going to start on the right immediately with the filmmaker, Mr. Golding. And let me jump into it and say, of the moments that you had in making this particular film, do you have one or two that stand out, or are they all sort of merge into the distant past? I know you're living it at the moment with going around, showing it along with Gary and others in the film, but something that comes to mind that might be of interest.
Yeah, it's wow, that's like, I know I don't have that much time, so, but it's really powerful to watch, because I sit there every time I watch it and I think of the moments that unfolded on screen, and I remember watching those unfold in real life. And there's a couple of them, the wax cylinders. I have a personal connection to the wax cylinders as well with my own story. So with Donald in that too. But I think the reveal of the wax cylinders when we were up there was an amazingly powerful moment. When they took the cylinders back to the community, they listened to it, and you could just feel in that room you kind of see it on screen, but you remember that, right, Don? It was a very, very powerful moment. So, and that one always stuck with me as well. So, and with each story was something beautiful. Tom Belt was just an amazing man. He's just his outlook on life, and Sophie Shorty and her family allowing us to come into her house and film them, and feed us, which was always good, and so all those things. Manny Wheeler, and he revealed this important story about his own language loss and his own, trauma that he's dealt with. So there's a lot, but I think in all, just to see how important language is to them and their communities, and what they're trying to do to encourage other people to really take it up and learn it, to educate the general populations on the importance of this language is key,
So let me follow up on that a little bit, if you would, Dan. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of stories of language revitalization in indigenous communities taking place across this country and in other nations as well. Is there a particular way in which you chose these three particular communities? Was there a specific reason for that, or just serendipity, perhaps?
I think I think it was sort of like weeding down through some of the ideas and stuff like potential stories, and then Passamaquoddy, of course. You know, when they heard about the wax cylinders and my own personal story, I thought was really important. But I think the underlying sort of thread was this idea of technology, you know, innovation, you know, that you know, Sequoia creating the syllabary was a technology and innovation that was created years ago, and that Native people have always been innovative and creative and, you know, in doing things. And I think that was sort of the underlying thread in some ways that connected each one of these stories in a very powerful way. And I think it shows, you know, so I want to make sure Native people get the credit, you know, for this kind of stuff. You know, even recording on the wax cylinders, you know, they had the wherewithal to think about the future, and you know, it wasn't like on a whim. They were like, oh, you know, I'm doing this for my future generations. You know, they knew what they were doing, and they don't. A lot of times they're not getting given enough credit for that, but they knew. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, speaking of technology, I wanted to direct this next question to Donald. Donald, you've had a long engagement with the cylinders, but even before that, when the library was working with these materials back in the days of cassette tapes, anybody remember those? Yeah. When those came back to the community by means of the elder who's passed away, David Francis, you listened to them on cassettes, and then now you're up to the the cutting edge technology of digitization. What changed for you, your perception of the materials that you heard?
Well, I sat in the room when David Francis, he was our oldest fluent speaker. He was in his late 90s. And he knew one of the speakers on the wax cylinders. So when he heard his voice, he knew exactly who that was. So personally for him, that was rewarding, but to hear the words being spoken that he hasn't heard for so long, it just warmed his heart. And it warmed my heart seeing him smiling and happy. So it really, for me personally, this has come full circle. We came here maybe 5 or 6 years ago when the new technology started to enhance these wax cylinders. Now, I wish David was here to hear them, because back in '75, it was pretty hard understanding because there was a lot of scratches. But with the new technology, it took out a lot of the background noises. But I think we had a good person on board there with Dwayne. He was our youngest fluent speaker. And I did start with a group of elders, but with some of the elders, it was hard for them to hear. And a lot of them couldn't write the language. So I needed somebody that could hear the words, write the language, and understand everything together. So Dwayne was the perfect fit. So it came around, we came here, I think it was on the first floor, and we met with everybody in the building, it seemed like, everybody on the mall here, and everybody had a vested interest. People that were working on the wax cylinders, people that were preserving them, people that were documenting them, they were all in the audience, and that made me feel good because they wanted to see a person that understood the language, and I think it came home for them. Right. That's what I felt.
Yeah, thank you. I guess it's one of the rare privileges we have as archivists is that people who are documented in our collections or who are using our collections actually speak back to us, right? They're not just inert and sitting on a shelf somewhere, but we actually see the impact that it makes. And to the intermediaries like Donald Soktoma and Dan Golding and others, it's a real privilege to have these materials back in circulation. I wanted to press you on one further point. The digitization and the cleanup that our colleagues at NAVCC, the National Audiovisual Conservation Center, did was beyond spectacular. I mean, it's really quite a work of art. And if you go on the site that we have, you can hear what the sort of raw sound sounds like, and as opposed to what happens when they clean it up and very carefully de-click and de-pop and do all of those things. But I was really astonished, and Donald gave me a very sort of an object lesson in the history of colonialism in this country, and he said, what I can hear in the cylinders now is the French in it. And can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Well, there's a long history that goes back with the explorers coming here. And the first group to try to settle in our homeland were the French, Champlain on the St. Croix Island. So they weren't trying to take our land. And we formed a relationship with them. And then over the years, that became our second language. So you could hear it on the introductions, on the tapes, even on the later tapes in the 1920s, you can hear when somebody finishes a sentence in Passamaquoddy, they finish it in French. And language is so important. It makes us understand who we are, and it translates to us with 20,000 years of language, of place names that describe a place that our ancestors have talked about for 20,000 years. So much indigenous knowledge right there.
Right. Thank you for that. Let me shift slightly to Jennifer, and thank you for being here, Jennifer. As you watch this film and the work that you did in terms of being a series producer, what resonates in this film and the work that you did to set up all of these kind of moments that have been captured on film?
Yeah, I think it was such a phenomenal opportunity. This is my first time working in media. I have a background in libraries, archives, and museums, and what I felt like it was a wonderful opportunity to expand, for Indigenous communities, to expand our own understanding of what Indian country is. Because sometimes we think of the Southwest, the Plains, the Northwest, and we forget that there are places like Passamaquoddy, the Eastern Cherokee, Miccosukee people down in Florida, and I really love this opportunity of growing our own knowledge and other folks' knowledge about what constitutes Indian country. But I think there was also a wonderful opportunity to give a gift to my colleagues in the library, archives, and museums field, because sometimes this work we do, we don't actually see the impact. Right. And it was a wonderful opportunity to capture what it looks like when these things go back to community, because none of that was scripted. We set it up and just sort of crossed our fingers that we would capture something interesting. But I think in working with our Native team, we worked to build a sort of familiarity with our participants. And what we got was so much vulnerability. I think when we see in all three of the stories, the sharing from each of the principals about not teaching language to their own children, that's very real. I think that sort of grief and despair that they hadn't done that, I think really came from having Dan behind the scenes, working with the folks to capture that, to share that. And it's just this real wonderful opportunity to show our field why it's so incredibly important to do this work, to outreach back to the communities.
Right, and on that note, I thank you for that opening, because I want to give a shout out to a person who has been somebody who has seen this process through here at the library, the American Folklife Center, for the last 40 years, and that's our colleague Judith Gray, who is head of reference. Judith has seen this process of, and I will use the word advisedly, repatriation of cultural heritage materials, particularly linguistic and other expressive culture, back to over 100 communities as head of reference, and she's been doing it for 40 years here at the American Folklife Center. And if you ever get an opportunity to come and talk to her, she can tell you more about all of the stuff that we're talking about times 10. So thank you, Judith, for all the work that you've done over the years. And I wanted to turn to Gary Glassman. Gary, you've been at this process, this is the second season of this wonderful series, and I was told to ask you the question, how did you get started in it? What's changed in terms of the focus of your of the series over and it's from season 1 to season 2, and I guess maybe previewing season 3, if we could do that?
Yeah, season 3. Let's hear it for season 3. I think the difference is Native participation and how that has grown from season 1 to season 2, and that we had very active collaboration with our participants in season 1, but it was largely historical, and it was about the world created by America's first peoples. But the most powerful aspect of that was that we were talking mainly to Native people about that. So here was a world that most people didn't know anything about, a world of 100 million people connected by social networks with unique forms of architecture and art and religion and medicine and government. And most people didn't know about that. And here we had Native people speaking about it. And so there was an incredible power in just that messaging. And so when we started thinking about season 2, we thought, well, how can we go further with this? And I think you can see and hear that having Native filmmakers connect with the Native communities opened up just so much more powerful, authentic storytelling. And so that's the main difference, I think. And I think we are already thinking about, well, how can we go even further than that?
Yeah, let me just ask you, could you just tell us a little bit about season 2 and the episodes that are, this is the second of 3, is this correct? This particular episode?
This is the
First.
fourth of 4, yeah. So they're all streaming on the PBS website right now. Yeah. This one will be broadcast on Tuesday. But all of them are streaming. The first one is called New Worlds. It's about bringing Native innovation and tradition into the future. The second one is called Warrior Spirits, about the tradition of athleticism and the power of tapping into oneself for the betterment of all. The third one is called Women Rule, and it's Native women and the impact they're having today. And this one, Language is Life.
Right. Yeah, Women Rule, that's a bit obvious, they do, but we'll go with that. And then what happens in next season coming up, or do you have had it laid out already?
It's aspirational right now, but I do want to say that I'm humbled every time I do this, and hearing from my colleagues, I feel honored and blessed to have participated in this collaboration, because I've seen things that most people don't get a chance to see, but that's the power of television too. When it's done right. And I mean, again, shout out to CPB and PBS, because this kind of programming can't happen anywhere else. It's the only place it happens.
Thank you for that. Dan, I want to return to you. You keep tantalizing us with this thing about a personal connection to the wax cylinders. And I will note for, I'm sure many of you know, but perhaps you don't, we hold recordings and cultural heritage, as I think I said already, of hundreds of indigenous communities across this nation and the globe. And again, when we have a chance for the archival collections and somebody who uses the archive to kind of amplify or illustrate what this means to us, it's always something to look forward to. And to that extent, what's your connection to the wax cylinders?
Yeah, kind of, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that I had a personal connection to wax cylinders too. And that's because my great-grandfather had recorded on wax cylinder back in the 1920s with Frances Densmore. He was a singer, and she recorded, I don't know, I can't remember how many cylinders, but him singing deer songs, quack. And he was the last singer of those songs. And I had heard them years ago, and they were from the part of the Wax Cylinder Project. They're really, really horrible, you know, copies in the sense of like they're really staticky, they're really rough, and they're, you know, they're not at the right speed, and you know, so they're really hard to hear, you know. But it's all, you know, nice to hear it, know that that's your great grandfather. But when I happened to be at the NAVCC doing the filming for this project, they actually brought out some of the cylinders of my great-grandfather and put them on the endpoint machine and played them for me. And I got to hear them for the first time, you know, restored. And it was powerful, you know, like he was saying, you know, he could hear some of the, you know, the French in there. I could hear like the tone of my grandfather's voice, you know, and I got this real sort of sense of, wow, you know, you can get a sense of who he was in a way, which was really powerful. But even more powerful was that I brought my son, Nate, with me, who's 17 now. This was last year. And he got to hear his great-great-grandfather for the first time on wax cylinder. And so when we talk about these connections to community, you know, it's deeper than that, right? You know, we understand these things, we see them, we experience them, not just with wax cylinders, but with language, with other things, and stuff. So, and that's the deeper connection. So, and so I still got to get those rest of those wax cylinders now. So, and maybe that's my next journey, try to revive those songs, you know, bring them back to the community. So we'll see.
Well,
Those Dan's piece is on is a bonus scene on the website, so people can actually watch that.
thank you. That gives me an opening to ask. So Donald, I mean, with regard to the scene on Pine Island, you have a community coming together, listening to and replaying and perhaps re-embodying the kind of the dances that might have been danced back in the days of Peter Selmore and Pierre Lecoute and Noel Josephs back in the 1890s. What else is happening in terms of how do those cylinders and those recordings impact youth within the community? How does that work for you guys?
Well, we have a lot of young drum groups in our community, and there's limited amount of songs that have been passed down. The 31 cylinders sort of changed that dramatically. Now, instead of just a few songs, now the drum groups are learning new songs that probably their great-great-grandfather was singing on those tapes. So it sort of energized the whole community. And when we sat with the elders in our community, it was a moment of healing too, thinking back what they went through about language, and then now something's coming forward to energize, and it shook up some of the elders in our community to think back of what they were going through. And a lot of them are pleased that this energy is coming back. And I think that the show here, I was just blown away when they selected us, you know, because we're getting the message out. And we get other tribes calling us about their wax cylinders, about the process we went through. It took a while to to sort of tweak it a little bit to get it transcribed. We had to find a granting agency, and NEA came to the rescue, which, thank you if you're out there. So that got us started on the transcriptions.
Right. Great. So actually, in that case, I'll go over to Jen, because Jennifer, in her other life, is also senior program officer for the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And Jen, I was just curious as to whether what Donald is talking about in terms of the use of archival materials in language and cultural revitalization, how does that serve as a model for or a model of other similar efforts that you've seen come across your desk and your knowledge base?
Yeah, I'm really lucky to work with the Institute of Museum and Library Services. My portfolio includes programs that fund tribal archives, libraries, and museums, as well as Native Hawaiian organizations. And our grant programs do this very work. We've been doing it for a long time. We've created, dictionaries. We've funded projects like creating dictionaries, apps, educational programming, outreach, trips back to repositories so that they can bring materials back. So it's just really an amazing opportunity to show what something could look like. Each of those projects are potential grant projects, and I'm really thrilled that there's actually something finally out there to show, because sometimes the communities just need to see this work in action. And that's been the exciting part about it, because they're inspiring each other. We heard that when Passamaquoddy, when we did the screenings out there, they were saying, hey, we want to dub Star Wars into Passamaquoddy, And out in Cherokee, they were saying, let's dub the entire episode in Cherokee. So there's this, they're inspiring each other, and that's sometimes what we need to see a little bit, and that's the power of media. You can see it, it's really easy to capture, we can share this message out, and I'm really thrilled that PBS and CPB invested in us to do that. I think that the impact of this is far beyond just the entertainment value. It's really laying groundwork for communities to be inspired and to take folks like Donald, and these are our new, our creation stories are filled with heroes that always told how we got from one world to the next. And I think what's really exciting is that with this media, we're creating these new hero stories with folks like Donald, with folks like Dan, who are amazing storytellers and cultural workers that are going to take us into the future. So I'm really excited to be a part of it, and actually can point communities to this and say, here's something to show what's been done.
We're going to maybe have time for one more question from me, and then we'll turn it over to the audience questions. Gary, is there anything you want to just sort of wrap up in terms of this material? I was really interested in the way in which, for instance, unfortunately we don't have our Navajo colleagues or our Cherokee colleagues who are in the film here, but anything about their participation that stands out or strikes you that you want to impart to the audience out here?
Well, I guess it was something that Jen just said about entertaining. Mm-hmm. And I hope everybody was actually entertained as well, because there's humor to it. And I think one of the themes of the series is that there are incredible challenges out there for everybody, but in particular across Indian country. And yet the people that we're featuring in the series are taking on those challenges with joy. Yeah. And again, I think you can feel it, from the films themselves. And I think that's something we're really proud of, is that you can learn something, but be entertained at the same time.
Yeah, I had to say there was a strange moment of dislocation for me in watching the Navajo adaptation of or Fistful of Dollars into Navajo, and I remember thinking, that's really strange moment of removal when the original movie was made in sort of in a dubbed in Italian and English, and now it's been like dubbed into Navajo. So why not Passamaquoddy? Why not Cherokee? Let a thousand flowers bloom, right? I mean, it'd be kind of cool. Okay, I think we have some folks out there with microphones, and we have time for questions. It's a little hard for us to see you. Can you guys see out there? Okay. Yes.
Are there people out there?
Yeah. Yes. There's one question right there. Please go ahead, ma'am. And please, if you would identify yourself, just for the
Absolutely. Well, my name is Danae Barr. I'm really excited to be here because my next project literally involves Native American culture, and my projects revolve around what's in the archives, like for example in the Folklife Center. I'm a documentary experimental filmmaker and photographer, and I did a project in the Eastern Caribbean, but it was based on the journal here at the Library of Congress, and I was able to put together an art exhibit that then let people know about St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They didn't know about the culture, and also it raised the pride of the culture because they were showcased in a beautiful way, and then it turned into a tourism thing where they were able to get people to invest at an airport. And then, I mean, so, and the reason why I'm excited for this, we're talking about impact. Can we take things out of the archives, like and create stories and things like that? So my next project involves, that's why I'm very excited, because I'm gonna come in and look at languages that are associated, for instance, with the Piscataway. Because I know I have a team of creatives, and we can create films, we can create music projects, we can create interactive things, and really bring to life what's in the archives. So we have so many exciting things, history, and it's just not, and the reason I'm so excited because, a lot of times in this world, we have things that make us feel depressed, or et cetera. So if I can bring something that raise the vibe and make people feel good about themselves and bring people in connection and not focus on things that really are taking us, in the wrong direction, right. It's very exciting. Yeah. So I will be in touch, at the Folklife Center, and we actually should stay in touch too. Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Another question out there?
John McGregor here. How hard is it to get funding to do things like this? Because that must be a real barrier for a lot of people who otherwise would be doing it right away.
Things like what, the film or the archival repatriation, or which part of that are you referring to?
I was thinking more of the films.
It's very hard.
I wouldn't stop there, but that's what I was thinking about.
So you have a list of funders. You want to elaborate on that a little bit, Gary, in the film? Is that necessary?
Well, you have to start with a powerful idea, and you've got to be able to communicate that to the people who are in a position to fund projects like this. But you can also start small, and we have the technology in our pockets these days to go out and make something that is meaningful to you, and start with that. This is a major series, a major national PBS series, and it costs a lot of money, but there's power in shorts. And I would just never, in my career, I've never let money stand in the way. If there was something I wanted to do, I found a way of doing it with whatever resources I could pull together. So my advice would be, don't worry about the money, just worry about making the film that you want to make with the resources that you have.
And I guess the reason I sort of wanted to ask which part of it you're talking about was that Jennifer works in a very specific area in which the figures are not perhaps in the six figures that you're giving out funding, and Donald and you all might have a different dollar amount that you're looking at, but and the aims are different in terms of using archival materials for language revitalization as opposed to a major funded thing which is going to be broadcast nationally and internationally. That's a crude way of putting it, I guess. Does that seem appropriate to say, Jan?
Yeah, I think there's, we have some amazing grant programs across agencies in the federal government that do some really amazing work and can fund some of these projects. So there is some funding that can support this work, but we're really appreciative to those that stood up for this season, and we're hoping that we can get enough interest to keep it going. We already have communities who are saying, what about us now? That was so amazing. What about us? We have stories, come out over here, come over there. And we're really excited to be able to show different areas of Indian country, and folks in Hawaii and Alaska saying, "Don't forget about us." So the stories are there, and we're hoping that funders will agree, and the season does really well, and it's folks learn together, and there's a lot of support for it.
Great, thank you. Do you have anything to add to that, or are you?
No.
All right, I'm looking up and I'm trying to, yes, there's a question out there.
So I have a question about, talking about the stories coming to you. How, in the preparation for seasons like this, how do you choose and locate the stories? Are these stories that you knew were out there already? Did people come to you and say, hey, I have a story to present? Or how did you put out a call, or did you, to figure out and determine what you were going to put forth in the season?
Who wants to take that one? Go ahead.
Well, when we decided that we were going to do, I should say when I decided that we were going to have Native filmmakers leading each hour, I thought that the best way to do that was to create themes that each filmmaker could take ownership of. So that's where it started. And then when we assembled the team, we worked collaboratively across all 4 hours through a process of research and development and finding the stories. And one of the keys, I think, to, first of all, that they need to be stories. I mean, something needs to happen. We need to have something, some action, something, we have to be in a place and something has to happen there and we need to film it. But also, a major factor for a great story is the participants and whether they're willing to really be open and spend the time with us, and there's an assessment of that, and clearly Donald and Dwayne and the whole Passamaquoddy community opened their arms for us and invited us in, and Donald's still here, so that's one of the key factors, I think, is the willingness of the participants in their communities to be open and tell their stories.
And I think there's a really important part about, I mean, we were grabbing stories, just things like, Dan came in with those 3 stories. He was like, I've heard of these amazing stories, like, can we outreach to these communities? But I think what was exciting to see on my end was the sort of co-visioning around what was actually happening. Dan would talk with folks and ask, are things going on? Here's our shoot schedule during this time. Do you have anything going on? And our participants were saying, well, actually, this is happening. Or what if we did this? And each of the stories in the 4 hours are our participants saying, what if we, showed Star Wars at a drive-in on May the 4th, and we made it happen, So it was really wonderful to be able to watch Dan and our other producers really work to almost spitball, sandbox with them, like, what's going on, what can we do? And big appreciation to Donald and Dwayne, because these guys were out. They were planning everything on their end, so when we landed, things ran smoothly. They were organizing in the community. So it was less so that we came in and, forced people to do things. It was really this co-visioning with our participants that really offered this great view. And Sophie's, we went into her community. She had these ideas. She came in really strong. This is what I want to do. She was a former Miss Navajo. This is the way she wanted to be portrayed. And we worked with that. And that was a really wonderful process.
Yeah, and even like with that story with Sophie was, that wasn't the first choice. Originally it was with Manny, a scene with him and his parents, and talking about why he was, language loss and why they didn't teach him the language, but his parents didn't want to do it. They didn't feel comfortable, so we had to do a shift. And luckily Sophie came in. I think you introduced us to Sophie, and so she was like, yeah. And then she's like, oh yeah, we can talk about this, and all this stuff, and this beautiful scene came out of it. So there was a lot of shifting and stuff. Even though we had the basic stories down, it was still like, okay, Manny said, well, they're not going to, we can't do that. So, okay, that's fine. We'll figure something else out. And, that's just the process of filmmaking, right?
And let me say that's a great example of, sort of flipping it in that the scene with Manny and his parents were going to be about losing language, and with Sophie and her family, it was about retaining language. So all of a sudden it became just this incredibly positive scene.
And there's so many more stories that we wanted to pursue. We just didn't have enough time. We have these ideas that we were pitching at each other, and our team continually says, have you seen this amazing thing? Oh my God, this would be so great. And we're already sort of grabbing the ideas and putting them to the side of I hope if we get a season 3, this is what we would move on immediately. So the stories are out there, and we're just excited whenever we're always troving, keeping an eye out, ear to the ground, trying to find interesting things going on.
And I guess, just in terms of the stories, I was not led to believe, but when we first were approached by Dan, back a year ago, and when you introduced us, we were thinking it's all going to be about the return of the songs. But then the whole Pine Island thing and the return of land back sort of comes right up front, and that really flips the script, if you will. Was that something that you had in mind already when these guys came knocking on your door, Donald, or did it just turn up, happen in that particular way?
No, things were moving with the land back movement, and we've been trying to get our treaty lands back, and timing just was perfect. It just fell right into place, and I said, what about this? And we tied in the Wax Cylinder song because we felt it was important for that song to be sung that hasn't been sung across our land. And for me, it was really powerful, that moment.
One more question right there.
We're almost out of time.
Yes, but that's all right.
Hi, this is a question mostly for Donald, I guess, but I think that I saw in the Pine Island scene that there was a placard there, and one of the pictures on it was of Wayne Newell. And I guess the question I have is, how does it feel knowing that generations of other elders have worked on this process, on this work with these cylinders and trying to bring the language and the songs back, and to be bringing that forward and to a sense of sort of greater completion than it has been in the past?
Well, with all 3 shows in this film, I saw all the communities looking forward 100 years. How is this going to affect my people 100 years from now? We always talk about the 7 generations before. We also look back the 7 generations behind us. Yet Wayne led the movement to revitalize our language when it was being attacked in the 60s, and it was on the brink of loss. but he energized it. We felt we had to bring him to the island to be part of that. So right in the center of the island, we put Wayne's picture, and we danced around it, doing the snake dance.
Yeah. I think
Thank you for bringing him up, because he's
Yeah.
very important in our history, just like David Francis and all the elders in our community. That I think this is across Native country where the elders in the community want to save the language. And I think this show really brought that forward.
Let's a round of applause for our guests, please.